It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
The front-runner for Romanian President Georgescu has again been banned by the Romanian authorities. It is a second coup d'etat to cheat the people of Romania of their democratic rights, and it is all being done under the direction of Brussels, von der Leyen and the EU. Either the Supreme Court in Romania will have to reverse this decision, or the people will have to remove the regime in Romania. And the massacre of the minorities in Syria, Christians, Druze, Alawi, Shia, are being massacred in their hundreds, if not thousands, and the world remains completely silent. In Kursk, the worst British military disaster since the Norway debacle is underway. I say British because the British planned every single bit of Zelensky's incursion into the Kursk salient in Russia, and in the United States, in Washington, even in the Capitol building. They're roaming around with guns, and they're gunning for President Trump. It's all coming up this evening on the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
When Kalin Georgescu was in the lead in the first runoff of the presidential election in Romania, with more than 50% of the vote, with the rest split between 7 or 8 candidates, it was a flagrant election-stealing piece of skullduggery, the likes of which had never been seen in the European Union before. There was outrage, but the election was to be rerun. Georgescu's nomination papers were accepted, and the opinion polls show he was set for a landslide victory. in the Romanian presidential election. And today, the very same electoral board of judges and non-judges have invalidated his presidential candidature. It is truly unbelievable that in a European Union that describes itself as a garden of democracy, that such incredible criminality can be shown in an important and large European Union country, namely Romania. It is incredible still that nobody in the Western media is giving it any coverage at all. How could they? It is the most flagrant theft of the Romanian people's democratic rights that it is possible to imagine. And there's only 24 hours to sort it out. I'm unequivocal on this, that if the Supreme Court of Romania does not reverse this blatant theft and criminality, the Romanian people will have to rise up and remove their regime. They have done so once before, you may recall. It didn't end well on Christmas Day of 1989 for Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena, who were gunned down by a firing squad against the wall. It is incredible that the only offense, by the way, Ceausescu politically is a world apart from me. I'm not carrying a flag for him, except in one regard. And it's the one regard that has led to this theft, this attempted coup d'etat. Ceausescu wants to end the war in Ukraine. He refuses to allow Romania to be built into a NATO base camp to be used across the short sea against the Russian Federation. He refuses to allow Romania to be anybody's puppet state. And that's the only thing I have in common with him. He's a figure of the right, of the nationalist right. He makes Nigel Farage look like a leftist. I have nothing whatsoever to do with him. But I do love Romania. I do actually have a book published in the Romanian language. I was there very recently. I love the people, I love the country, and I will not stand silent while their rights are trampled upon and while their presidential election is stolen. It was a massacre of the minorities, and helpfully, you may think, the mass murderers filmed themselves whilst doing it. During Ramadan, with grins all over their faces, they hunted down and gunned down men and women, young and old, the only common characteristic, all unarmed. Such tough guys, these head-chopping, heart-eating, fanatic Islamist extremists are. They're very good at cutting the heads off people whose hands are tied behind their back and who cannot fight them back. They're very good at murdering women, although they like to keep their women locked away, and they like to keep the women they stole from other people locked away. Yazidi women, for example. They are big on women's modesty, but that doesn't stretch to not murdering them in their homes. Helpfully, you may think, they've filmed themselves doing it. Therefore, the culpability cannot be shared. The culpability cannot be obscured. They had their patches, ISIS and Al-Qaeda patches, on their arms. They were chanting obscenely the name of God whilst they murdered people in cold blood, many hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them. And yet, this massacre of the minorities in Syria over the last few days is virtually unreported on Western media, particularly in those countries that did the most to put these maniacs into power, to usher the black flags of ISIS and Al-Qaeda into Damascus. Their media, so tightly controlled, they're not even reporting a massacre of Christian people, of Alawi people, of Shia and Druze people by their clients, by their agents, by the people they armed and funded. David Lammy gave £50 million to these people. Just last week, the British Foreign Secretary gave £50 million of your money. Do you know what for? To help them build an inclusive government. Inclusive government. Well, that inclusive government's gunmen just massacred the people that London presumably was referring to as those that needed to be included. The United States is the only country in the Western world that has roundly condemned the massacre and has attributed to the people who took the videos. You hear what I'm saying? They took the videos. The United States presidency attributed it to the Islamist fanatics of HTS, the rebrand of Al-Qaeda in Syria, and their ISIS allies. The European Union, on the other hand, did not mention the people who took the videos and blamed the minorities for getting themselves massacred. It was community noted on Twitter within half an hour, but it still stands extant as the European Union's position on the massacre of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. The legendary white helmets are already in, cleaning up. I've got a picture on my phone of the white helmets picking up the corpses, dumping them in skips to take them away, just in case there's any international observer remotely interested in finding out what happened. But of course, so far, there are none. The European Union backed HTS and the mass murderers. The United States condemned the mass murderers. The British government, on the other hand, has said nothing at all. Least of all asking for its £50 million back, now that we know that the idea of an inclusive government in Syria has just been drowned in blood. I asked, it's been very widely shared and remarked upon on Twitter, will anybody at all, intervene to defend the Christians of Syria, where Jesus once walked, the people who speak the language of Jesus, Aramaic? Will anybody intervene? If this was in Yugoslavia, NATO would already be there. If this was in any other part of the world, the demand for United Nations action, the demand for RTP, right to protect, the right to humanitarian intervention would already be filling our airwaves. But as I've told you, the airwaves are entirely silent. So no hue and cry is possible. No one will intervene except Russia. Russia has already intervened. It has opened its airbase in Latakia, and something like 20,000 refugees are now cowering inside it. Daring, I suppose, if you think that the ISIS and Al-Qaeda people would not like to clamber over the wall of the Russian airbase. You don't know them like I know them. Iran, if they were to move in to protect their co-religionists, would declare war on them. If Iraq intervened to protect their co-religionists, we'd declare war on Iraq. If anybody at all were to intervene, it would be condemned, unless it was Israel, which is already in possession of fully 1/3 of Syrian territory and is undoubtedly dancing a jig of delight, like that one on top of that van in New York City on 9/11, because this is exactly the Syria they spent so much lobbying time trying to bring about. I said many times, for 10 years I've been saying to you that what we have done in Syria is the dirtiest thing that we have ever done, and we have done many dirty things. It is beyond the comprehension of any sentient being who was given the facts, key caveat, that we would have tried so much, so hard to bring Al-Qaeda and ISIS to power in a country on the Mediterranean, the European lake. I just say this, it's all I can say. I'm out of words, to be honest. If you think these Uzbeks and Tajiks and Uyghurs and Algerians that are cutting the throats of the minorities in Syria are going to remain in Syria and not visit a Christmas market near you, or a London bridge, or a Bataclan, or any of the other massacres carried out by precisely these very same people, you're an idiot. You don't deserve the vote if you're going to vote for people that will put knives in the hands of these assassins who will later come to assassinate you. Now, the disaster in Kursk is almost painfully poignant to recount. It was his biggest victory, said Zelensky, when he invaded Russian territory as a quid pro quo for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He poured reinforcements into it. Well over 100,000 soldiers were poured into the Kursk salient in Russia, and they have resisted an enormous counterattack by Russia to remove them. It's not looking that much like a victory now, and I take no pleasure in that, because for some reason, whether it's blockers behind them who'll shoot them if they try to surrender, these brave Ukrainian soldiers have refused to surrender, even although they are completely surrounded and there is no way out of the Kursk salient now. Russia has given them deadline after deadline to surrender their weapons, NATO weapons, the best NATO weapons. There'll be some great reverse engineering done when this is all over in Kursk. But the Ukrainian soldiers are not surrendering, and therefore Russia is about to rain down fatal firepower upon them. And scores of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers will be destroyed. Those of you who say you love Ukraine, those of you who wave Ukrainian flags, wear Ukrainian badges, have Ukrainian flags in your avatars, you don't love Ukraine. You hate Ukrainians. You must hate Ukrainians because you have cheered on every maneuver, every effort that has so spectacularly rebounded on the suffering people of Ukraine. I can only conclude that you hate Ukraine. You don't love it at all. It's not Slava Ukraine that you're shouting, really. It's death to Ukraine. At least it's death to Ukrainians, because perhaps 1 million of them have already lost their lives, and hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of them are maimed, mutilated, or their minds destroyed for the rest of their lives because of the proxy war that you helped propel them into. Now, I used to be called a Russian agent for calling it a proxy war. This was a Putin talking point, don't you know? Except it's now a Donald Trump administration talking point. Both Rubio and Kellogg, General Kellogg, have both stated unequivocally, this is a proxy war between the United States and the Russian Federation. And all you idiots that, like Pavlov's dogs, barked, Putin, 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 whenever anybody said that, whether it was Candace Owens or me, must feel, or at least ought to feel, thoroughly embarrassed now. So now that the American administration has openly declared it to be a proxy war, in which they have no further interest, and the examples of the extent to which that's true will be adumbrated by my first guest, Ray McGovern, in just a few minutes. Now that one side of a proxy war is withdrawing, you'd think that would mean the end of the war, except you didn't bargain for little soldier Schultz, little Merz, little Anna Baerbock, little Napoleon Macron, and little Keir Starmer. Because out of nowhere, like the 600, they have decided to gallop into the valley of death, into the guns, onward and onward, into the guns. The unfortunate thing is it's not them on the horses. The unfortunate thing is it's not them that are going to be cut down by the guns. It's your sons and even your daughters. Latvia today announced the beginning of conscription for boys and girls. When I launched last week the No Conscription League in Britain, I hadn't quite counted on the amount of support that it would immediately rally, including a very significant number, a statistically significant number of ex-service personnel, the only people really who know what war is really like. And even if you have no son or daughter about to be sent into the guns, it's your money that's going to pay for it. I have only 1 minute to deal with a very strange phenomenon which in the last 48 hours has erupted in the United States. First of all, a professor at UCLA. Not a small deal, that. A professor at the UCLA has, in writing, called for the US military to stage a military coup in Washington and remove the Trump administration from office. A House staffer was caught with a gun in the rotunda, headed for the very room that President Trump was sitting in earlier last week. And he said he didn't understand what the big deal was because he'd brought the same gun into the same building the day before as a kind of dry run. White House security men shot and wounded a man in the grounds of the White House who was armed earlier today. And J.D. Vance, the able Vice President of the United States, was surrounded by Ukrainian protesters as he walked, unwisely I must say, with his 3-year-old child, who was terrified at the Slava Ukrainian crowd that angrily surrounded the Vice President of the United States. All of this tells me that the security forces of the United States of America have not stepped up to the mark. And we may very well see another nightmare on Elm Street, a la Dallas, Texas, November 1963, in 2025, somewhere in America. If that doesn't make you sit up and take notice, I don't know what would. Ray McGovern, former presidential advisor, CIA man, coming up right after this.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone, have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, the poll tonight, has Trump killed NATO? Yes or no? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my X, my Twitter account. You can vote on the YouTube community poll, and you can vote on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please subscribe to this channel and give the show a thumbs up. If you want to call the show, it's toll free in the United States and Canada. +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland. 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. An old friend of mine, haven't seen him for years, Ray McGovern, used to brief President Ronald Reagan on the Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. He was a CIA officer. In fact, the last time I saw him, he gave my now almost 18-year-old military-age, conscription-age son, Zane, a CIA badge. Zane was too little to know what that meant. He didn't keep wearing it for long, but he has kept it. He treasures it because it was a gift from his uncle, Ray. Ray McGovern, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Good to see you again, my friend. Let's start with the bizarre series of security incidents in Washington over the last couple of days. I don't know about you, but they've got me on edge. What would you say about them?
I've been on edge ever since Butler, Pennsylvania, for that first shot where Trump says that God said, "Donald, duck," and of course he ducked, and of course the bullet went through his ear. There are people out to get him. I've been suggesting that he make sure that his tasters in the White House dining hall, and not only there, but at the FBI and at the Director of National Intelligence, that those people always taste the food. There's lots of people in the deep state that would like to have Trump gone because they are very vulnerable. Have not been held accountable for what they did to Trump in his first 4 years, and how they did everything they could to prevent him from being elected in 2016, where they failed, but in 2020 as well, where they didn't fail. In other words, they didn't disrupt. Well, Biden won, and that was our problem.
The incident with the vice president astonished me, Ray. It cannot be the case, surely, that the vice president of the United States, a particularly potent one, I think, one that one could easily see as president of the United States, it surely can't be the case that he's walking around in public with his small children, is it?
It's really up to him, George. The Secret Service is supposed to be surrounding him, particularly these days, but you can't turn down a vice president who wants to take a walk. The issue here is how loyal the Secret Service is to the president or to the vice president. There's a lot of residue. And when John F. Kennedy was killed, parts of the Secret Service were involved. So unless Trump can clean house in a way that hasn't been done in many, many years, he's vulnerable until he puts his foot down and makes sure that not only he has the authority, but he can enforce it by loyal people. And that goes in spades now for things that are coming up with continued FBI shenanigans. So they were supposed to release all that information on Epstein, right? Well, they they slow walked that, and then they didn't give the Attorney General the real meat. They're doing the same now with respect to a fellow named Sethrich, who was murdered on the streets of Washington at 4 in the morning on the 10th of July, 2016, just as the campaign was going into full bloom. I'm looking at that very carefully because we looked at the media coverage of that, and this has to do with something very consequential, George, namely Russiagate, because it painted Putin as the devil incarnate, the Russians the same. And with Biden and Blinken and Sullivan, just 4 months ago, I was deathly afraid that we were closer to a nuclear exchange than ever before, and I've been around for a while, okay? That's how bad it was. And so I looked at all this evidence and how the media deliberately suppressed the evidence that the cornerstone of Russiagate, namely the famous Russian hacking of the Democratic National Committee, didn't happen, okay? Sworn testimony in Congress, 5 December 2017. Why have they suppressed that? Well, it's really easy, George. Here it is, okay? If there was no evidence of a Russian hack or a hack by anybody else, and we saw that right off the bat, then how did Julian Assange get those damaging emails that were so damaging to Hillary Clinton? Well, it had to be a copy into a computer, copy down into a thumb drive or something like that, because it left no signature on the internet. Well, who could have done that? Well, it had to be somebody with access to DNC computers. Do we have any names? Yeah, the fellow who was shot on the streets of Washington on the 10th of July, just 1 month after Julian Assange announced. We have emails relating to Hillary Clinton, and we are about to publish them. So this is a story that is going down now, and tomorrow, the new head of the FBI, Kash Patel, is going to have to figure out whether he's going to ask these people or tell them or order them to come clean. That is, people who have been hiding, suppressing all the records that the FBI has on the Sethrich case, whether he's going to ask them to come clean because the judge has put a deadline of tomorrow, Monday, or he's going to let them slow walk this whole thing again. This is a big deal, and the preliminary indications are that Patel is not fully in charge yet, because the U.S. attorney has let it be known, no, we're probably just going to give you half of what you wanted, and we're not going to come clean at all. This is big. Will Kash Patel be able to rein in the FBI like the Attorney General was not able to when she asked for the Epstein documents? I don't know. We'll know more tomorrow. I just hope that Kash Patel, since he occupied positions where he knows where all the bodies are buried, George, he knows it, chapter and verse, he's written about it, okay? I just hope that he has the strength of, the strength of purpose and the courage to say, all right, the game's over. I'm the new sheriff here. You cooperate when the judge says release records having to do with Sethrich. First, the FBI said, oh, we don't have any records at all. And then that was proven false. And then said, oh, we have too many records. We can't possibly go through them all and make them available. Well, the judges finally said, okay, the 10th of March is the deadline. Let's see tomorrow whether Kash Patel is really in charge of the FBI, or whether he'll let these fellows play games again, just like the FBI and the CIA did during Trump's first term.
Wow. Almost 4 million people watched this show last week, Ray, and you've just written the name Sethrich large on the face of this program this evening. So we'll all be watching tomorrow, and we hope to ourselves follow this story in the days and weeks to come. Let me take you, as it were, to the Eastern Front, both General Kellogg and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, have acknowledged what you and I and a few others have been saying for these last few years, that what's happening in Ukraine is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. We were denounced as Putin agents for saying what the American government now acknowledges to be the case. If it's a proxy war, and one side of the proxy war no longer wants to be in that proxy war, that should be the end of the matter. But it isn't, because all these midgets, these 7 dwarfs of the European Union, have stepped up to the mark. What do you make of it all?
Well, it's been a comedy. People beating their breasts saying, we can do it. We can save Ukraine. Now, it's so pitiful, George. I hope that your audience knows that in April of 2022, a deal was struck between Ukrainian negotiators responsive to Zelensky and the Russians that they would stop the war. There'd be a ceasefire. The only thing the Russians demanded at that point was no Ukraine and NATO. It was agreed upon. And who came in to squash that deal? A fellow with real curly hair. His name was Borisjohnson. Okay, he said, no, you don't do that. And then we won't have support you, and we won't support you for as long as it takes. Well, Zelensky is to blame for that because he made that choice. And I just regret the fact that upwards of 500, 600,000 Ukrainian youth have died in this war, 100,000 or so Russians as well. This need not have happened, and it's time to end it. Putin, I think, wants to end it. So does Trump. The problem is to get the Ukrainian negotiators, again, with the Russians, to work out some sort of deal. A deal can easily be struck, but the bottom line is there will be no Ukraine in NATO, and there will be a cordon sanitaire between Russian forces in what is now Ukraine and Western forces. In other words, there'll be no shooting missiles into either Russian-controlled territory in Ukraine or Russia proper after this deal is struck. The other thing that the Russians want is a complete new security architecture where, all these years after the fall of the Soviet Union, all these years after 80 years after World War II, a new structure needs to be invoked and put in place so that neither side feels threatened by the other. And all this stuff about Russians won't stop in Ukraine, they'll go to Poland, right? Oh, and then they'll go to Moldova. Well, that's bull. I mean, the Russians already stopped. They stopped in April of 2022. And it was Boris Johnson carrying out the instructions of Blinken, Sullivan, and Biden that put the kibosh on it. The Ukrainians are not going to get as good a deal now as they did before. The Russians will hang on to many of those provinces, but a deal can be struck, and the fighting has to end. And Trump, I think, is serious. I think Putin is. I welcome the initiative. I think they'll get together pretty soon and decide, well, what's to decide? The U.S. has cut off arms supply. The U.S. has cut off intelligence supply. My God, what does that mean? That means that the Ukrainian forces, such as our left, are not going to be able to hang in there for many more months or maybe many more weeks. So let's stop the carnage. It's possible to do that. Zelensky, of course, is a person needs to show some flexibility, or he's out of there. And I suspect he'll be out of there within the next couple of weeks.
Yes, my feelings too. Now, when you were sitting, as you did, briefing President Reagan, who was succeeded, of course, by his vice president, George Bush Sr., the guarantees that were given by the American side at that time, when Gorbachev very foolishly agreed to withdraw his forces from Eastern Germany, to facilitate the reunification of Germany. He did so on a promise from your president that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east if Gorbachev agreed. There can't have been many more gigantic broken promises ever made than that one, really, don't you think?
That's right, George. And just think about the quid here for that quo. The quid was given by Jim Baker, a Texas lawyer. He says, hey, Mikhail Gorbachev, how would this be? You recognize a reunified Germany. Now, George, 27 million Russians or Soviets died at the hands of a unified Germany, okay? So that's a big, big quid, okay? And they said, what do we get for this? And that's when the promise came in. Not 1 inch eastward will we move NATO. Now, there's been all kinds of explanations as to why that wasn't written down. I had a chance to ask Kuvaldin, one of Gorbachev's most close associates, one time, and I was in Moscow about 5 years ago, and I said, tell me, Mr. Kuvaldin, why wasn't that written down? And he said, well, Mr. McGovern, the usual explanations, Germany hadn't bought into it yet, and this was about Germany, right? The Warsaw Pact was still in existence. But, Mr. McGovern, you want to know the real reason? I said, yeah. I said, we trusted you. Now, trust has evaporated. There have been a whole series of agreements, Minsk agreements, all kinds of agreements that have been agreed to and reneged upon by the Germans, by the French, by us, okay? And treaties that such as it used to exist, like the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which I had a personal hand in offering intelligence to support it. 72, George W. Bush, forget about it, out of that treaty. The Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, George, which you'll recall, 1987, prohibited and destroyed in place a whole class of medium and intermediate nuclear missiles. My God, I never thought that would happen. That stayed in place for 32 years until Donald Trump was told by some military, well, we better get out of that. And he got out of that. And when the Russians said, why are you doing this? The answer they got, and I know this for a fact, it's none of your damn business. We do what we want to do. And you know what else? We're going to put intermediate range missiles, not only in Ukraine, but in Germany next year, 2016. We have a bilateral agreement announced at NATO, but not part of NATO, just Olaf Scholz is asked, what's this all about? I thought we got rid of those missiles. And he said, no, the Americans have decided to do this. And I said, yes, we will. So Europeans have to grow up. And the seven dwarfs, you're going to have to contend with the realities. They're still in denial. I'm afraid there'll be some sort of false flag to try to put a wedge into this budding agreement between Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia, if that happens. But the thing is over. The Russians are approaching the Dnieper River. They will only stop when they're satisfied that there's enough distance between them and Western forces so that they won't be in receipt of missiles that are fired from the west to the east. And that's sort of guaranteed now that the U.S. has announced that we are depriving the Ukrainians of the technology, of the intelligence necessary to find targets and to fire those missiles into Russian territory, be it now in Ukraine or in Russia proper.
Ray McGovern, former presidential advisor and all-round wise man. Ray, my son Zane sends his best regards to you. Thanks very much for joining us on the Mother of All Talk shows this evening. Has Trump killed NATO? Yes or no? 25,000 or so of you have already voted. It's quite close, actually, relatively close. Has Trump killed NATO? Yes or no? Let's take a break, and your calls coming up next. Stay tuned. big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the new MOATS.tv website. Thank you very much, all of you. And I'm really going to make this point as firmly as I can. Every one of you has to go to MOATS.tv and donate something, even if it is £1, even if it is $1, €1. Nothing comes for free. 2 shows a week cannot be produced for free. We need every person watching to donate at least £1, $1, €1. I can't put it more clearly than that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Has Trump killed NATO, yes or no? Now, Syria is one of the big questions that we are discussing this evening, and we have Sarah in Europe on Syria. First up, go ahead, Sarah. What would you like to say?
Hi, good evening. Hi,
Good evening, ma'am.
I just wanted to let everyone know that you are about to be gaslit. You're about to be told to not believe your lying eyes, and you're about to be punished for having pattern recognition abilities above a koala. Because I don't know if I sent you pictures, but the white helmets are already using tractors to pick up the bodies before the international committees arrive and before the news agencies arrive. Because as you have seen already in the videos with your own eyes, that for the past few days, minorities, that alawites and Christians and Jews, have been massacred in a scale that actually is the definition of the genocide according to international law.
They are asking you, I mean, I made the point, Sarah, in my opening monologue, that these people actually filmed the crimes that they were committing. They looked straight at the camera, grinning into the camera, as they murdered elderly men and young boys. They didn't try to hide it. They filmed it and showed us the film. And yet the European Union seems to be trying to put a question mark over who actually were the murderers.
When they tell you who they are, believe them. And this is who they are. The thing is, over the past few hours, the new Syrian government, the Jolani government, the one that, the CIA and EU has applauded for so long, has issued an official statement banning its soldiers from filming what they are doing. So don't expect them to film anymore. We still have cameras. We still have phones. However, they are cutting electricity and phone out. So I think the hundreds of videos that you guys have seen are enough so far to understand what's really happening. But not only are they filming there, but you may have also seen several videos of Syrians in Europe who are anti-Assadist, and they came to Europe because they are oppressed refugees, even though they refuse to go back now, filmed themselves encouraging what is going on right now in Syria.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw, in particularly, I saw a German being harbored in Germany, where there have been, I don't know, a dozen major terrorist attacks in Germany carried out by precisely the kind of people that are murdering the minorities in Syria. I saw him encourage it. He said to kill alawites and Christians is better than killing Jews. He said it openly in Germany. And the police have not yet knocked on his door. We have an outfit here, one of whose mouthpieces, a Bangladeshi by the name of Dili Hussein, who are openly encouraging, in fact, warning the minorities that they're going to deserve everything that they're going to get, period. Everything, period. The British government are not banging down his door. They're arresting Richard Medhurst, a Christian boy who wears a cross around his neck under the Terrorism Act. It couldn't be more blatant, Sarah, could it?
The pastor, and they've also killed, actually, you've seen the footage, there's dead 1-year-olds, under 1-year-old, 2-year-olds. The 1-year-old, the 2-year-old, alawites might as well also be a 1-year-old Christian. I wasn't baptized at birth. I was baptized later in life. So to me, when I see a 1-year-old that's dead, that's not even faith-based. They could be anything. That's still a 1-year-old. You know, we did not give them the chance to choose their morals yet. But in Europe where I am, which is like mainland Europe, out of every Syrian terror attack, you've never seen a Christian Syrian do it. You've never seen an Alawite Syrian do it. You've never seen an Alawite or a Christian Syrian groom kids in the UK. These aren't the enemies. So it really baffles me why Europe is self-destructing so bad. I have a whole theory about it, that actually Europe has been quite strong, people have been quite strong for so much throughout history, that I really believe that some of them have developed a fetish and goal to someday be the victims. That's why they do these self-sabotaging policies. That's my theory, because nothing else makes sense. Why would you put yourself in a position where you're going to end up being a victim? Anyone with pattern recognition abilities knows that they're inviting danger into their homeland, and I don't understand that. We've experienced it for so many years. Our first experience actually goes as far back as the Ottoman rule. We were safest under French colonization, but outside of that, throughout our history, it's not been good for us there. And I just don't understand why people here don't see that. And now, even with all the videos you've seen, you're going to be told not to believe your lying eyes. You're going to be told that the thousands dead, well, that's an outlier case. You're going to be told that the thousands who killed them, that's individual-based case scenarios, and that's not really a habit. This is a habit. This is what these people believe. This is what these people want. They film themselves making those statements. I don't know what more do people need to see to understand that this danger exists.
Well, you don't know, and I don't know. And certainly nobody deigns to explain why it was decided unanimously by all the European powers and all the North American powers that it was a good idea to bring ISIS and Al-Qaeda to power in Damascus. What could possibly go wrong? I grew hoarse asking the question, but answer came there none. Sarah in Europe on Syria is the first call of the evening. Thank you for it. Now you can leave comments on YouTube. Scan the QR code now. Leave a comment on the YouTube stream. Keep it clean. We'll keep it on air. Lorenzo Orsini says, Trump is all talk. The war will still continue. The deep state is too entrenched. And Akila Makan says, what happened in Syria has already happened in Libya and Afghanistan. The CIA helped to topple governments, and the spread of chaos and division using proxy terrorists to overturn governments. And Arcane Eclectic, what a wonderful name. Arcane Eclectic says the UA equals international symbol for I have no idea what I'm talking about. I just say whatever the TV tells me to. This is a very good point. I wanted to make it in my monologue, but I didn't have the time left to do so. None of you, as I said, just touching on 4 million people watched Mother of All Talk Shows in the last 7 days. And that's a very, very, very sizable audience, but it's a drop in the ocean compared with the general public as a whole, even just in the United Kingdom, never mind across the Western world. Do not underestimate the number of people who've been fooled and who remain fooled. If I was in any danger of underestimating it, it didn't survive the reaction from people that I thought like me, that are not in my circle but tangential to my life, a week past Saturday. when, to my astonishment, the first two people that I spoke to were filled with curses about Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and tears of sympathy for Zelensky. Do not underestimate how many sheep there are. And even though at least one of those two knows that the very same governments and media outlets have been lying through their teeth about Gaza for 14 or 15 months, he was still ready to believe them on Ukraine. These people have lied to you about everything, from JFK until now, through everything, through all the assassinations, all the wars, all the pandemics, all the crimes. They've lied to you, and you know that they have lied to you, but you're ready to believe them on Syria? You're ready to believe them on Ukraine? Do you need help somehow? Pamela Strandquist says, watch, Trump will reverse positions in NATO. He's just as controlled as every other so-called US leader. The neocons want perpetual war for profit. They want Russia and Iran taken down. And Cristi Niagu says Romania is now officially under a dictatorship. On the line from the lovely old Dublin town is Declan. But on Syria, Declan, welcome back to the show. What would you like to say?
The first thing, George, I'd like to say is that was one of your best monologues, right? That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is we had a big demonstration in Berlin today against these Einsatzgruppen. Annalena Baerbock, those characters from England you mentioned, and all the rest of it are exactly like the Einsatzgruppen, which they have at the moment. Now, you said everything I wanted to say except one thing. The good expatriates in Europe, the good Syrian expatriates in Europe and in America and everywhere else need as much help as they can get. And what I'm trying to do, because I have a long track record in Syria of over 10 years, we're trying to put various teams together. We've made progress in Hungary, Germany and Sweden. Unfortunately, with Claire Daly, who I'll come back to in a second, sethrich getting marginalised, we're weaker in a lot of places. They go on about Assad puppets and Putin puppets, and I've been called all of that, as you have. Now, if these people showed up at your door or your neighbour's door, whose puppets would you be except your family's puppets? And that's who the defenders in Latakia and Tartus are. For you and me, we can't believe what the Einsatzgruppen got up to, especially in Ukraine, where they shot more people than anybody else. But it is happening right in front of our eyes, and with the exception of George Galloway and a small handful of others, not even the Stop the War lot, there's very few people in Germany, in Britain or Ireland or anywhere else who will oppose the modern-day Nazis of Annalena Baerbock and von der Leyen and the people you mentioned in England. So what I'd ask you to do, George, is if you can help put this team together. We are making progress on both sides of the aisle in Germany, as I said, in Hungary and in the United States of America. That's what I want to say, George.
Declan, just tell me, is Mother Agnes safe? Is she in her place, or has she left the country?
Okay, George, people are asking me about other people. She made a statement recently, okay? So for the moment, she's okay, the last I heard. But other people who you mentioned and had your photograph taken with in Dublin, those people are in the firing line, and I don't want to give out any information on them or of the other Alawites, Assyrians, and Armenians you met in my presence, okay? Because their relatives are in the firing line. What?
Okay, I understand. Declan in Dublin, thank you very much indeed. Now, a big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the new MOATS.tv website. G, Beefy Miracle, John Austin, Olivia Carmichael, and Frederick Zand. A very hearty thank you to each and every one of you. And a big thanks to the London taxi driver, Mr. Aziz, who donated 50, there he is there, £50 he donated to the mother of all talk shows. My dear brother Aziz, thank you so much. Please do become a MOATS donor tonight. Give what you can to support the show. You can do it easily through our new website, MOATS.tv. Nobody gets a cut of it. Nobody gets commission on it. You just click donate now. Give £1, €1, or $1, one-off or regular. And as the results of the cold snap come in, remember us in your will. Let's take a quick break, and then we've got the one and only Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace. It's going to be worth hearing. Stay tuned.
All the activists that have been making noise about what Israel is doing, the genocide. And so, it takes a world to make this happen, but thank God Trump is leading the pack. But my question to you is, can we celebrate? It seems like it's too soon to celebrate because we don't know, what's really going to happen. I just don't trust those Israelis. They say one thing and do another. Look what they're doing in Lebanon. So what is your level of optimism for this latest attempt at a ceasefire? And that's my main question. So I'll let you answer
well, at
that.
least 75%, Wendy, and cautious celebration. A non-alcoholic glass of champagne, perhaps. Actually, I recommend that in general, especially date champagne. Has anyone out there tasted date champagne made entirely from dates? And of course, non-alcoholic. It is superb. If I could get my hands on one of those this evening, which I definitely can't, I would be having a glass of that and quietly, cautiously celebrating. But you are absolutely right to say, God bless Jeffrey Sachs and all the other speakers and activists who have striven might and main in all weathers, in all countries, in all parts of the world to help bring about the atmosphere that has prevailed and has forced the American presidency to be changed, and for the American presidential policy towards the war to be changed. I'm in no doubt about this, why I mentioned them first. Trump is the reason there is a ceasefire. He is the reason. If Harris had won, there would have been no ceasefire. That's quite an achievement, before you've even got your feet in the presidential slippers.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
No man in the United States in recent and indeed in the history of the last 50 years has done more for peace and bring about the peaceful resolution of international conflicts and disputes than Ron Paul. He formed an Institute for Peace, and L McAdams is the able executive director of it. And I'm very glad he's back on the mother of all talk shows after quite some time, I think, Daniel. So we're very glad to see you. Let me begin, if I may, by testing what seems to be a recurring theme in the feedback I'm getting on the show. I personally believe that Trump is committed to bringing an end to the Ukraine war. But there's actually rather a lot of people who don't think that he really wants to, or who don't think that he will be really able to. What's your point of view on that? Is Trump sincere, and will he succeed?
I believe he is sincere. I believe this is something he's latched onto, and part of it's for domestic political reasons. He's seen, as he himself put it, 3 years of complete inaction on the part of the U.S. administration. In fact, not inaction, but the opposite of action, dialing us toward World War III. And I think he's absolutely sincere. I believe, as with Trump being Trump, there are some strange curlicues, George, that I can't quite figure out. The minerals deal seems about as wacky as you can get. It doesn't make any sense at all. But the dressing down that Zelensky got in the Oval Office, along with Vice President Vance, is something absolutely historic. It was an historic moment, and I think that was certainly the beginning of the end for Zelensky's scheme.
Now, Ron Paul and yourself have been strong supporters of the new Director of National Intelligence, Tulsigabbard. She almost didn't get confirmed because of her stance on the so-called Syrian revolution. She was called an Assad puppet, a Putin puppet, because she repeatedly warned of the character of the people that Western policy was driving to power in Damascus. Those critics look rather foolish today, don't they, Daniel?
Yes, to us they do, but unfortunately most of the world media at least still is writing it as Assad remnants, regime remnants have risen up and attacking the new democratic government. But absolutely, Tulsi Gabbard was right from the very beginning. She went to Syria with Representative Kucinich at the time to see what was going on, a fact-finding tour. That's the last time we were close to war after these false flag chemical attack, as you very well remember, George. She's proven to be absolutely correct. It should be a no-brainer. You shouldn't be training, equipping jihadists. You shouldn't be training and equipping Al-Qaeda and using them to form your governments. Exactly what we did in Libya, as you mentioned in your previous section. We did the exact same thing, and it tore the country apart. I find the timing very interesting, George, that it was in late December that Assad finally fell, was pushed. It's around the time that Israel was getting a real shellacking by Hezbollah in Lebanon and by Hamas in Gaza. Despite the fact that they flattened the place, they were taking really unsustainable losses. And now you have an absolute chaos unleashed in Syria and a backlash where Professor Syed put a post up on X earlier today saying it may be 10,000 alawites and Christians who've been slaughtered over the last couple of days in Syria. I wouldn't be surprised. I've seen video, George. I'm sure you have as well. It is absolutely sickening.
Yes, repulsive, and the only thing more repulsive is the absolute silence of Western journalists and policymakers, zero in Britain, zero, have even reported the fact that these things happened, never mind drew any conclusions from it. I've been saying for well over a decade now that Syria is the dirtiest thing that we have ever done, and we have done a lot of dirty things. I remember, Daniel, being trapped in a lift with William Hague, then the Foreign Secretary of Britain. Imagine his luck, getting trapped in a lift with me. And he'd just come back from Jordan, where he had just given, metaphorically, a shipload of new knives to these murderers and throat cutters. And I left him in no doubt as to what the potential downside of this was. I said, you know, these people will one day appear in this very building with these very knives that you have given them. And they'll be seeking to cut your throat and even my throat. And it wasn't long after that that one of them actually did and murdered a police officer, a gallant police officer who was a good friend of mine. I asked David Cameron 10 years ago, Daniel, if he'd read Frankenstein. And if he had read it, had he read it all the way to the end? The monster that Dr. Frankenstein created was out of control in the end because he's a monster. And that's exactly, surely, what we have done with Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
Going back to Zbigniew Brzezinski, who thought it was a great idea to create and arm a jihadist movement in Afghanistan to give the then Soviet Union a black eye, its own Vietnam. I mean, I've been spending the last couple of days when I wasn't being repulsed by what I've seen, reviewing some of my writing starting back in 2011 about what was happening in Syria and about the U.S. move to overthrow. And this is it's a very late unmasking, George, of the entire false narrative of the quote-unquote Arab Spring, which was just an excuse to get rid of, well, for one, to be honest, to get rid of enemies of Israel in the region. And Syria is one of the last dominoes to fall. Next up is Iran. And this has been the process, and it's been very well documented that this was a goal of the neocons in the U.S. to do. This was the most predictable outcome possible. Yet somehow, when our media does deign to recognize the slaughter, we'll say, well, nobody saw that coming. Of course, they never listened to you over this past decade or so, or read anything that I and others have written about it, documented so well what would happen. And now we're seeing the result of this person who traded in his jihadist outfit for probably $1,000 bespoke suit, and I think someone said his watch is something in the neighborhood of $20,000 or $30,000. So he cleaned up well.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned or you alluded to the somewhat erratic nature of Donald Trump's foreign policy. I'm a great believer in waiting to see what Donald Trump does rather than fixating on everything that Donald Trump says, not least because he's capable of saying diametrically opposite things on the same day, even in the same hour. And he's at it again in relation to the Israel-Palestine track. One day, he's threatening condign outcomes for the Palestinians, going to bring down hell on them, like hell hasn't already fallen on them. He's going to take control of the Gaza Strip. And then today he says, we treat Ukraine and Israel exactly the same. Well, I hope so. Because it's about time Netanyahu got the kind of dressing down in the Oval Office that little Zelensky got, don't you think?
Yes, I think next time he tries to sit down, instead of pulling the chair out for him, Trump should pull the chair completely away so that Netanyahu could fall on his rear end as he deserves to do. That would be something I would pay to see. But I think Trump is doing things in the Middle East, certainly under the Biden administration, we have not seen. Now, we know that Trump and his administration are extraordinarily pro-Israel, and that might actually be, ironically, the reason why they can do some of these things. Now, he sent his special envoy for hostages to have a discussion with Hamas, which is, as I understand, never been done by any U.S. administration. And Israel had a panic attack about it, and the envoy was on our Sunday shows today, and I forget the exact quote, but it was something like, you know, Israel's freaking out. He said something that's amazing. He said, something like, we're not our foreign policy is not subject to Israel's approval, or something of this nature. Of course, that would be news to most of the members of the U.S. Congress. And nevertheless, it really is something to hear this. So getting involved, talking to Hamas, talking to Putin, that's at the very beginning of a positive move.
Yeah, although it could all be brought down crashing to the ground if Netanyahu launches an attack on Iran. And then we're into all-out regional war, in which the United States will be hard pushed to stay out of.
Yes, but I think it's getting more difficult as with each passing day, as the U.S. relationship with Russia continues to improve, as Saudi Arabia is being used as a place of negotiations between the U.S. and Russia and possibly Ukraine in the future. I think the last thing that either side would want to see would be this war to take off. And I think that Netanyahu, for as much of an evil man as he is, he's shown himself to be a survivor. Let's put it that way. And I think he understands that without 100% U.S. military backing, him taking on Iran would be a very bad move.
Indeed so. Let's talk more about the U.S. domestic scene, if we can, Daniel. I'm assuming that the Democrats are taking time out. They are leaderless, clueless. They don't seem to have drawn any proper conclusions from their electoral defeat, heavy electoral defeat by Donald Trump. Or is there something going on, as it were, sotto voce that we don't see or hear yet? But is anyone emerging? Is any alternative platform emerging? Or are they still Russia, 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 Putin, Putin, Putin?
Yeah, it's insane, George. I mean, they haven't learned anything so far from their errors, and it's a sclerotic, political movement. I haven't seen anything emerge. I haven't seen any indication that they've understood how resoundingly they've been rejected by the U.S. voter. There's no, the same voices, the same Chuck Schumers of the party are saying the same things and trying to somehow make some traction with the same old statements. And at this point, I would have to say nothing is happening. However, we do have midterm elections, and the party in power tends to do badly in midterms. The party in the White House tends to do badly in midterms. So they have some time to regroup, but what is it going to be on? The Republicans, ironically and shockingly, have become the anti-war party. Now, there are a lot of remnants of neocons, and you have the Beltway think tankers who become very rich on war. That's a given. But you're seeing people like Bill Kristol and the rest of the neocons returning to their home in the Democratic Party, which has clearly become the pro-war party. And the people, according to all polls in the U.S., have rejected. They don't want more support sent to Ukraine. And in fact, George, a Gallup poll just came out this last week. American support for Israel is the lowest it has ever been in the 25-year history of this yearly Gallup poll. It's down to 46%. So less than half of Americans support the United States to continue to backstop Israel's war in the region. And if you can get ahead of that curve, I think you're going to have a lot more support building behind you.
Yes, let's hope a politician with the courage to pick that one up and run with it emerges. It is bizarre, as you rightly said there. It's the Democrats that are the pro-war party. It's the Republicans that are the anti-war party. It's even more bizarre to me, Dan, let me tell you, that it's the United States pushing for peace and the Europeans that are pushing for war. This is an era of cross-dressing, all right. How do you see it?
Well, the Europeans are simply not able to let go of Project Ukraine. They've defined themselves. In the UK and in Berlin particularly, they've defined themselves by their somehow manic obsession with destroying Russia through Ukraine, and I think it was Viktor Orban of Hungary who said a couple of days ago, if for 3 years the Europeans with their NATO partner, the U.S., have thrown everything they can at Russia and have failed thus far, what makes you, i.e. Brussels, believe that without them, somehow you can push ahead and have a victory? I think it was a very good statement on his behalf. I think he said it in Paris, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a good point. How are you going to move ahead? How are you going to move ahead? There's a piece that just came out this morning. I forget where it was published, but a very, very large percentage of the weapons that the Europeans sent to Ukraine are crap. They've blown up in the Ukrainians' faces. This is a money laundering scheme, not just for Zelensky and his cronies, but also for the Western military-industrial complex that will write off weapons that are garbage and purchase brand new ones and invigorate the military-industrial complex back home. So there's something in it for everyone on this gravy train. But for the Europeans to go it alone, I mean, I'm going to have to stock up on some popcorn because this is not going to end well. Maybe they'll get little Radek Sikorsky to get involved with the fighting. He had a dust up with Elon Musk today that was something to behold. Hopefully your viewers will see it. Yes, it was great. Say, be quiet, little man.
Yeah, I saw that. I was cheering on Musk, something I never thought I'd say. This issue, though, of free speech, in which Musk is a proponent, a protagonist, is another of the aspects of the cross-dressing I was referring to. The people who are toughest on the need for censorship and locking down democracy, like has just happened this evening in Romania, are the so-called liberals, the so-called progressives, and the only people, although they have important caveats and exceptions, namely on Palestine, but on the right, they're crying out for free speech, let 1,000 flowers bloom, whilst on the liberal side, they're stamping out any flower they don't like the sight or smell of. Did you think you'd come to a day like this?
No, I did not. And I think a lot of it did start when Elon took over Twitter and renamed it X, and he exposed the rot just under the surface. He exposed, at least for us in the United States, he exposed the evil relationship between the U.S. government and social media platforms to where they were manipulating what could and couldn't be said. And I think there's a sort of an inherent, even as we've lost some of that spirit, there's an inherent sort of nature in Americans. They don't like being told what to say or what they can do. And I think the reaction has been incredible. And I think it had to have been fed. And I think journalists like Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger and others deserve all the credit for helping expose this. And I think, that was the tip of the iceberg, because what we're seeing is this continuing in exposing USAID. Now, they want to paint something like USAID as a bunch of wokester liberals, lefties gone amok. It's not that at all. What the rot of USAID is that both parties had their fingers in the pie. Both parties were using it as a truncheon to beat other countries to death that they didn't like, to overthrow their. So we're seeing more and more of it in the exposure of this. You're right. I didn't believe that I could see Americans screaming for no foreign aid and shutting down the USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy and all of these horrible regime change organizations.
Daniel McAdams, please give His Excellency Ron Paul our best regards. Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace. Thanks for being with us this evening. Let's take a quick break. Your call's next, all the way up to Gayatri with the social media news roundup. Stay tuned. Paul in Ottawa, in Canada, and he wants to talk about Palestine. Who wouldn't? Go ahead, Paul.
I went to Israel in 1990, and I met a lot of people that went to Israel, and they went to kibbutzes, and they were like, oh, you got to go to a kibbutz. And I went. And I have to say, they treated me very well. And they said, we're afraid of the Palestinians. They want to kill us all. And it was this propaganda that was just being perpetuated. And my belief at that time was, wow, they could show the Palestinians how to bring themselves up and even become better and better. The Palestinians should learn from the Israelis. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, I understand that what you're saying is arrant Orientalist nonsense, of course. I understand that your paean of praise to the kibbutz which is a settlement established on somebody else's land, stolen from them. The idea, how dare you, that these people who came from New York to occupy agricultural land had anything to teach the Palestinians who had been tilling that land for millennia is arrant Orientalist nonsense. And you say that they were afraid, Paul. They were right to be afraid. If I were to break into somebody's house and proceed to live in it, sending them out to live amongst the trash cans at the back of the house, I'd be afraid of them too. So there's nothing irrational about a thief feeling insecure, afraid of the people from whom he's stolen everything. That's absolutely rational.
Please forgive me for my ignorance back then. I was a young man. I believe in bringing humanity up. In my naivety, I thought, no, the Israelis are kind of on the right side. Now, it took me about 5 years to finally figure it out that, wow, these guys are insane. They are not just colonialists. They're really bad. I can't believe I did that. And I want everybody to know out there that you can change your mind. It doesn't matter. Please, open your eyes. And,
Very well
and
said.
Please.
I forgive you, Paul. Please consider my earlier admonition to have been a premature ejaculation.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go to Donald in Copenhagen on Zelensky. Always worth hearing. Donald, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you very much, George. And I'm really happy about the good work that you're doing in informing people of the events that are taking place, you know. And this gentleman that you just had on right now, I wanted, among other things, when the Nakba occurred in 1948, I was a child of 6 years old. And we were able to see it in movie theaters, and you saw these hordes of people being driven into the desert. And you really don't know the impact of that. Doesn't have the significance and the meaning what it does, because then we're bombarded with, if I'm dissatisfied with anything in my life, oh, it's the communism, we have to fight communism, get bombarded with all of these sound bites constantly, the McCarthy era and whatnot, you know. But anyway, this thing about our little friend Zelensky here, that we're trying to defend or support or whatever you want to label it, you know, he did say this, and I recall him saying that if Europe refuses to support his endeavors, there will be an escalation of terrorist activity here in Europe, you know, and then we will find out where all of the ordinances and the bombs and the explosives have disappeared to here in Europe, and we will, you know, that's a threat by this guy to threaten this here in Europe, to threaten us with that and not realize who in the hell is NATO defending us against. NATO is supposed to be for defense against who is the threat. And I'm quite sure then we're told that, oh, Putin is a dictator. And the thing about a dictator who has the representing the will and the betterment of his people is a good dictator. And the United States was founded on the idea separated from England because it said representation or taxation without representation is tyrannical. The United States, it doesn't. What are we talking about here? We're being taxed with no representation. We have leadership, and I'm sorry, but I'm not a follower because I can see clearly through what the end game is going to be. When Brexit left the European Union, I could see, I can see the end game here. They can exonerate themselves from any responsibility to any conflict that happens here in Europe, you know. And you can see that this guy Putin is not trying to take over Europe, not at all. He's just protecting himself. It's like if China was to make financial agreement with Canada, and in part and parcel of that was an agreement that they would put military bases on the northern border of the United States and Canada, there would be a reaction to that very quickly, I can tell you that. Now, the thing about democracy, this reminds me of Mr. Winston Churchill. And he clearly stated, he said, the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with a voter. And we need to just remember some of these things that have been said. Really, to the idea of some people are so, what they have cognizant dissonance, they can't remember anything other than Zelensky says we need freedom. Freedom from what? They're destroying that country, and what we need to do is find an agreement. One of the last thing I want to talk about is this idea of diplomatic immunity. In Dagestan now, there's a resistance going against Putin, and I can tell you quite sure that we have our agents, provocateurs over there, handing out handfuls of $100 bills, and this idea that we can have diplomatic immunity for people to cross borders and enter countries with tons of cash and just handing it out to whoever. This has got to stop, because why would you have diplomatic immunity for a country that is not interested in diplomacy? And this is my rant for today.
Well, let's hope this new era will be different, but you touched on some very important points there. George Orwell, in his book Keep the Aspidistra Flying, Oliver, I think, Gordon Comstock, who is an advertising agent, he says that advertising is legalized lying, and television and journalism in Britain now is legalized lying. And as Comstock in Orwell's novel sought to demonstrate to his friends, advertising works, propaganda works. If you have, you see, some of us are watching the mother of all talk shows. Many more of us are getting alternative views on social media. We're watching other broadcasters like me, and we're watching even Tucker Carlson, the doyen of the alternative media sphere. But that still leaves the vast majority of people. And those people are hourly. I mean, even when I'm listening to the football on the radio, I have to rapidly turn the volume to 0 every hour. Why? Because every hour there's a 5-minute news bulletin. And that news bulletin is legalized lying. The entire framing, the entire narrative. And I don't want my children to hear lies. And so I myself now am a completely so-called mainstream media free zone. I do not watch or read or listen to anything at all in the legalized lying business. But there's hundreds of millions of our fellow citizens who are listening and lapping up every single word. And talk about cognitive dissonance, even people who are acutely conscientized to the lies around Gaza are ready to believe the lies around Russia, Ukraine, and even Syria. So we have a long way to go, Donald. Neither you nor I are spring chickens. We're not going to see the promised land, but we may have taken our children an inch or two towards it by the time we shuffle off this mortal coil. Thank you, Donald in Copenhagen. DW comments, Clinton is a criminal. Clinton is responsible for the breakdown in US-Russia relations, and therefore directly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. And Scotian Doomer says Reagan and Thatcher sold out the West. We are still living in the wake of their neoliberal nightmare. And Lawrence Battis says it was never Trump's intention to kill NATO. It is Trump's intention to further dominate its European vassals. He will use NATO to to pervert the territory into a financialized profit center. And Simon King says, thanks for guiding me to the No Conscription League. As you say, it should be the sons and daughters of those who approve of this war who should be at the front. And Will Seymour III says, Trump's between a rock and a hard place due to his associations with Epstein that are trying to make him Netanyahu's poodle. Josh is on the line in California on Trump. Let's go there. Who wouldn't? Josh, what do you want to say, my friend?
Hi, George. I've been re-examining my thoughts on Trump and the Republican Party as of late, and the kind of high-stakes game that they are playing both at home and internationally. I've always known that Trump was a brinksman, and intentionally so. And as someone who as someone who has a keen awareness of the external threats that the U.S. faces, and someone who has a keen awareness of the external threats the U.S. faces. But despite his bombastic rhetorical approach to foreign leaders and international treaties, I never suspected him of employing a strategy as sophisticated as bluffing to build the pot, as they say in Texas, as a way to create the incentive for international treaties and institutions that are truly sustainable in history, and that perhaps is the silver lining of some of the times when he's failed in his life, most notably. Now, I'm not someone naive enough to mistake the Republican Party for anything other than the remnants of the Confederacy, the Rebs, the two-party system itself, of course, being a holdover from the Civil War. But the new states in eastern Ukraine, whose names I won't endeavor to mispronounce, have me re-examining just how much the Republican Party is still dedicated to the concept of independence from the Union of States, especially in the presumed last days of the settler colonial empire, which now appears in its final form, to borrow video game terminology, the NATO Zionist Axis, the tyrant of our time. Last week, with you, I touched on the subject of Mandela's Law, and of course, the application of that law would require substantial concessions from the United States. So, assuming that is one of the existential threats Trump is aware of having to face, potentially, the problem of how best to set the stage for making those concessions palatable, especially to people who have become so accustomed to an elite status in the international community, is the crucial problem, I think, that we must endeavor to solve for everyone's sake.
Yeah, we're a very, very long way away from that. So when you say in the final form, I hope you don't mean that we are in the last days, because we're not in the last days of Israel. We're not in the last days of American empire. We may have reached the last era, the last period, and the signs of decay and rot are everywhere and are irreversible. That is true. But it takes an empire quite a long time to fall. And before it's done, it continues to have very serious teeth and claws and nuclear, thermonuclear claws at that. So it's a long time before your formulation of Mandela's Law, which is a very good idea of yours. Anyone guilty of genocide has to give territorial concessions to the victims of their genocide. But that will not be seen by you or me or our children or our grandchildren. I'm, I suppose, having to play the role here of pessimism of the intellect. Optimism of the will is indispensable, and I possess it in abundance. I spend all of my day, every day, in my 70th year, optimistic in my will. But pessimism of the intellect is equally important. Otherwise, it leads to adventurism. Otherwise, I get people, for example, all the time saying to me, what we need is the downfall of the Labour government and a general strike. Well, The Labour government was elected 9 months ago and has a majority in Parliament of 174. It is not possible to bring it down, to knock it out of office. And general strike, have you seen the trade unions? The trade unions are actually, in civil society, amongst the most active tail enders of NATO and the EU and their sundry crimes. The idea that all you've got to do is utter a mantra, general strike now. This belongs with Wolfie Smith and the Tooting Popular Front. This will have to be built brick by brick, slowly, one brick on top of the other. I'm confident because I'm optimistic of the will that we will get there. But I am equally sure that it will not be tomorrow or the next day, and that there will not be many occasions in which we take one step forward only to take 2 steps back. Now, with the show this week tops 4 million online, the podcast is doing equally well. Make sure you download it. It's available from tomorrow morning. In the last week, we've been in the top 50 in the UK, India, and China. And we've been number 1 in Egypt for an entire week. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. And you can listen, of course, to the weekly podcast via the moats.tv website, which I'm hoping you will all be visiting to leave your donation to keep the show going. Now, poll update, 26,000 people have voted. Has Trump killed NATO? On Telegram, 64% say yes. On X, 66% say yes. On the YouTube community poll, 71% say yes. And on the YouTube stream, 67% say yes. You've still got, 5 minutes to vote. Make sure you do. Sarkar is a legend of ours. He's in Glasgow. He wants to talk about Syria. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Evening, George. Thank you so much for taking my call. George, it's not a call when I would say, oh, I told you so. Because I remember, I'll go back to one of my calls with you 7 or 8 weeks ago. Intelligent people like yourself, Scott Ritter, Richard Midhurst, Jeffrey Sachs, everyone had said, what will happen to Syria when this Jolani guy, who was one of the top hitman guys in ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the Oxford-Cambridge equivalent of terrorism, when that guy, through a Western-sponsored coup, with the help of that shameless Turkish government led by Erdogan, just to humiliate Syria and Assad, got a coup and got him kicked out of the country. This guy was always a recipe for disaster. Intelligent people had warned this well in advance. Now, The Guardian has said that in the last 2 days, close to 1,000 people have been killed by these forces, officially. George, you and I know, you have been in this industry for too long. 1,000 when this officially, you know how many more have been killed. Someone who does not even respect minorities, who does not even respect the original, Christian communities from Malula, where Aramaic is spoken. These guys have been brought in by our Western puppet, that Erdogan. They have not only destroyed the Palestinian cause, have not only destroyed the cause for Hezbollah. Now these guys are publishing news in the newspapers. Oh, these Syrian forces are killing. We sponsored them. We trained them. We made sure that whenever Assad did something positive, we had to put a propaganda just to kick him out of the country. We set the world on fire. We cannot play the fire brigade right now. If there are ashes, we deserve to make sure that there's no more repeat of that. But alas, that never happens. Every time we paint someone whom we don't like as a dictator, and when we replace that person, we bring in someone much more worse. Libya, Syria, Iraq. George, we can keep going on and on and on. Your show would last 4 hours if you start keeping naming them. Will we never learn our lesson? Have we become that shameless, we Western governments? And I won't even talk about Turkey. They're an abomination. Why do you think, George, we do this? And what benefit does it do to humanity?
Well, it does no benefit to humanity. I can answer that easily. Why we do it, I genuinely have no idea. I've asked Cameron on the floor of the House. I've asked William Hague, trapped in the lift. I asked Tony Blair. I asked Alistair Campbell, the last famous Britisher to meet with the blood-stained Jolani before his forces went on the rampage, massacring Christians and other minorities. Him and Rory Stewart, a former parliamentary colleague of mine whose father used to be the head of MI6. Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell gave the absolute seal of approval to the Al-Qaeda ISIS government in Damascus. How could I possibly explain why? It's mental health territory, surely. It cannot be rational. It cannot be rooted in our own self-interest. The Assad regime had many faults. Any regime that lasts more than 50 years and where the president's name never has to change is, by definition, a deeply flawed political system. But was the Assad regime better or worse than Al-Qaeda and ISIS? Only a lunatic could declare that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are better. Really, only a lunatic could say that. And yet that's what the lunatics in charge of our asylum did conclude, and used our money, our diplomatic and our propaganda and our intelligence organizations to bring about. Now, nobody, neither Cameron, nor Hague, nor Blair, nor Campbell, nor Jack Straw, nor any of the people I've asked this to, have given even a semblance of an answer, and certainly none that makes any sense. So it doesn't do any good for humanity. It does great harm to humanity. The scenes in the videos that I have watched today and yesterday, it's a cliche to say they are heart-rending. They are obscene. They are the ultimate pornography, where armed human beings, in numbers, pick on unarmed people, individuals, people begging them in the name of the Prophet Muhammad during Ramadan, telling the killer that they've got children, please don't, and they unload a magazine into a farmer in broad daylight, and then they turn to the camera and recite the names of God. They turn to the camera and grin. No words to describe that, Sarkar. Now, a big shout out to tonight's top donors who've been on to the MOATS.tv website since we came on air. I'm deeply grateful to Selwyn McLean, Nick Santoro, and Sandra Quinn. And a big thank you to Rebecca Christian and Paddy O.H., who made significant donations in the last 20 minutes. Thank you so very much. Please check out the website, moats.tv, and leave your donation there. Now, every Monday, I set out for London to film the other show that I have it out with Galloway. On the way there, by the way, I have some great chats with my supporters on patreon.com/George Galloway. They get every Monday a live chat with me. So you might find that attractive, and if so, follow me on patreon.com/George Galloway. But here is how you can join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Watch this. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Be on the studio wall. Participate in the debate about the greatest issues of our time. This is the place where we tackle the world's biggest problems and offer some of the world's best answers. You can have your say. Write to me at our website at haveitoutwithgalloway.com. SuperThanks.com and join me here in the studio audience.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go to Canada, where RB wants to talk about the Middle East. Go ahead, RB. What do you want to say?
Hello, George. How are you doing?
By the grace of God, good. What do you want to say, sir?
Well, first, before I touch on what's going on in the Middle East, I would want to talk about what happened in the Kursk region, the Kursk salient. In 1943, the mighty German army launched the largest battle of all time, trying to take, after their debacle in Stalingrad, they tried to attack in the Kursk region to turn the tide. And it ended up being a complete disaster for them, and it was probably the beginning of the end for them, eventually 2 years later, when the Russians rolled into Berlin. And the Kursk salient battle, which was the largest battle of all time to this day, and largest tank and aerial battle of all time, proved to be the end of it. Now, I don't know how, 80 years later, these geniuses decided, well, let's try it again, except this time with some ragtag Ukrainian forces, and let's try to beat Russia in the Kursk salient again. When anybody with a rational mind, and you're talking about lunacy, anybody with a rational mind would say, how do you think this will end up this time? Did we never learn from history? Did we not learn from Napoleon? Did we not learn from Hitler? And once more, it ended up backfiring on them just horribly. And so I think that's the beginning. The Kursk in 1943 was the beginning against the German army. And in 2025, the Kursk salient attack was the beginning of the end of this Ukrainian proxy war, obviously. And so I also wanted to touch on the Middle East. What I find very, very intriguing about what's going on in the Middle East is that Israel is occupying a third of Syria at this point. Turkey is occupying a third of Syria at this point. And they're leaving whatever's left around the Damascus region up to these jihadists that used to be called ISIS. And I often wonder what ISIS stands for. Perhaps, George, ISIS stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. And everything that's going on seems to benefit them and their plan for a greater Israel. What do you think?
Well, it definitely does benefit them. And there's never any murder and mayhem from them on the streets of Israel, though there frequently has been on the streets of Germany and France and London and so on. So it all does make you wonder who ISIS, who Al-Qaeda really are, really were, who really are at their core. But there's no doubt that their message of extreme fanaticism and sectarian hatred and bloodlust and death cult has attracted a very significant number of Muslims around the world. That's why people went to Syria from all parts of the world to form part of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda army. We fear these people at home, but we are quite happy to give them knives and weapons and money if they go to a place and fight someone of whom we officially disapprove. And that's exactly what has happened. I understood that as a cat's paw tactic, but I simply don't understand why you would want to actually help them so much that they win. Now that they have state power, they can only shame you. They would shame the devils in hell with their conduct since coming to power, and especially in the last weeks. I mean, no wonder David Lammy hasn't said anything yet, because only last week he gave them £50 million of British public money. And this week, they shame him, if shame is something he's capable of, by demonstrating through the lenses of their own cameras what it is that they are doing with the 50 million. And of course, like Frankenstein, this monster might get out of control. Who knows who it will attack next? Who knows what it will do next? You think you've got it under control now, but you might not always have it under control. After all, Dr. Frankenstein thought he had his monster well under control. RB, the first part of your contribution was simply masterful. It wasn't a great line, but it was a great contribution and shows the erudition of the students and teachers, you're one of them, that attend this global university of the airwaves. And I, for one, am very proud of it. I'm very proud that you made that call to us this evening. My good wife's up next with the social media news roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, has Trump killed NATO? Whilst the answer is towards yes, it is not quite that straightforward, isn't it? There's room for hesitation, because it seems that yes, Trump is very straightforward. It's the pig without the lipstick, as you say. But there remains a very deep distrust among the people towards those who are leading people. And if you think about it, for how many generations have people grown up in an environment, in a society where they don't trust the people? Where did people grow up? When was the time when people did trust the government?
I never trusted them, but most people did, and now they don't. You're right. The level of trust in Western countries towards their government is at an all-time historic low and vanishingly small and quite close to zero. But the reason for doubt in the poll is, number one, was it Trump that killed NATO, or was it NATO that killed themselves by overreach?
Right.
A further doubt is he really intending on killing it? I mean, he keeps talking about leaving NATO, but he hasn't left it yet. And is he really just demanding that the Europeans pony up more money so that he can actually make a profit out of it? Not just the obvious profit of less Americans' money being spent, more European money, but the weapons that they're going to buy in the NATO countries are overwhelmingly American weapons. So it boosts the American military-industrial complex. And then there's the level of distrust amongst people who probably call themselves left-wing, who just have seen so much of Trump, have heard and listened too much to Trump, that they don't really believe anything he says. That's a healthy attitude. Just hope that he does some of the things that he actually says. Yes. And then if he does them, well, give credit for it. That's just sensible politics.
Well, all that you say is perfectly reflected in the commentaries. Theresa Kelly says, well, giving Trump credit for the current chaos going on with the terrorist run amok NATO is like giving senile Reagan credit for the Berlin Wall coming down. The list of reasons and players involved in these significant events unfolding during end times could fill a whole book. So I will sum it up with this. It is karma, reaping time for all in the West. And Ravindra Bhatia says, well, not necessarily. Trump is a double dealer and as sus and two-faced as the rest of them. They are playing us like a second-hand guitar, George. And Matthew White says, I think Trump has killed NATO as any of us knew it. However, I bet my mortgage that in 4 years' time, the US will be scrambling to give us NATO 2.0. It existed to service US hegemony, and I expect that post-Trump, it will be relaunched and even more US-centric than it already is.
Maybe it'll be replaced by ETO, European Treaty Organization. The rest of us will not be eating, but there will be an ETO that has got plenty of money and weapons.
So George Orwell keeps popping up on our show, isn't it? Because his book 1984 has been so significant in today's events. So Graham King says, NATO died when the Soviet Union fell. Trump may be the one to pull the plug today, but it has been brain dead since 1991. Artificially creating boogeymen to justify its existence is simply Orwellian. We have always been at war with East Asia. And then the mainstream media, or what was it? We tried to come up with a different name for it because we just don't want to give it a credit as mainstream media anymore.
Legacy media, museum media.
Legalized lying.
Legalized lying media.
So Andy Hanlon says, George, I agree entirely with your view on the mainstream media, and I refuse to engage with its constant lies, propaganda, and gaslighting. So in short, the mainstream media is for the terminally gullible. And on that note,
there's a lot of those.
Yeah,
there's a lot of terminally
and many
gullible
around us and yourself. Lance Ford,
and amongst you.
Yeah, well,
there's members of our extended family who, on at least one, maybe two subjects, are completely at odds with what we think and say. How do you work that out when on 95% of things they can see clearly the truth, but on 5%, well, they're with the enemy. How does that work?
They buy that piece of lie from the war machine. But on that point, Lance Ford makes this message. I have supported George for 25 years. The one thing I will say is that I was a racist until I stumbled upon George. After listening to George, I soon came to understand that we all have value. Those feelings were more difficult to overcome than you would imagine, as we are immersed in negative messaging all of our life. But I stuck with George, and as it sits, I wish everyone could listen. Now here's his suggestion. To the thousands of people commenting right now and tomorrow here on the YouTube chat and elsewhere, and deliver George's message everywhere. Go to places like CNN and Fox and Sky News and spread George's message of equality. Shouting into an echo chamber always results in a clear echo, but the message never gets into the ether. And of course, he doesn't mean going onto those channels and talk to them himself, but in the commentary, in the chat, in the chatarati. So,
nice. Thank you very much, by the way, for that very nice message.
Finally then, John Sadler, how are we going to serve a hot war with Russia, with Starmer as our wartime PM? I mean, if you put it like that, I mean, just if you place the pictures of Churchill and Starmer next to each other, it's unimaginable, isn't it? It's laughable, if it wasn't so serious. And also, what do you think about the new sentence?
David Lammy actually could fit Hermann Göring's uniforms. It just struck me. Maybe they can get them. Maybe Herr Schultz will send over for Lammy some of Göring's big extra size jackets. He spent £500,000 since July on dinners.
Wow.
£500,000 on food and wine. No wonder David Lammy is a Zeppelin of a man.
That's a lot of chips.
A lot of chips. Speaking of which, I'll take you for your
Thank
chips
you.
later. Let's finish with our legend in New York, Erebos on Syria. Welcome, Erebos. What have you got for us?
Salubrious late evening and a wonderful hello, power and greetings to you, the Honorable George Galloway, to Mrs. Gayatri Galloway in her southern front porch attire. Excuse me, ma'am, did I leave my boots in your yard? You know, she is always looking great. And the wonderful staff, the magnificent Jaya. There's something that I learned from Gonzalo Lira, murdered in a Ukrainian dungeon by Stinkin' Blinken and Shaky Jake Sullivan. It was called, he called it the Gelman effect, Gelman amnesia effect, where you could be, is a theory created by Michael Crichton after a physicist named Murray Gell-Mann. And it's basically you could be reading, you could be perusing the same media. They use a newspaper as an example, where you could clearly see in one article of the paper that they're lying, there's contradictions, it's all bullshit. But then the same person reading that same newspaper would read another article further along in the same publication and totally believe something else in a different story, in a story they either have no knowledge about or, as I would adumbrate, they choose to believe. So the Gelman amnesia effect might explain some of what you have been experiencing. Just to mention something about the tragedy. Yeah, I learned that from Gonzalo, you know, and if there is an afterlife, may his soul rest in peace for what he's been done, what has been done to him, what he's been through. Ashe, in Syria and Palestine, you know, as a solutions-based thinker, I put my hopes in Yemen. They're the only ones that left. You know, no one else in the world is going to help the people of Syria or what was Syria. No one else can break the siege and the various attacks and the extinction of the Palestinian people. They are, you know, as you mentioned before, they're the best Arabs in the world. You know, I put my hopes in them. You know, the rest of the Arab leaders, they're either traitors or enemies, you know, of the Yemenis, of the Palestinians, and of the Syria minorities. You know, great job, Bashar al-Assad. You know, this is what your neglect has wrought. And I understand that, you know, his wife has cancer and it's very distracting and it's painful and stressful for him. But as the leader of a country, how hard would it have been to say, listen, I'm falling back. I'm giving this to the generals, my father's generals, who did so well with Russia and Iran, defending the country, and I'm going to, you know, take care of my wife or what I got to do. But his absconding and going to Russia or being abducted to Russia, whatever the story is, that's inexcusable and unacceptable, and we see the results of that now. So the people of Yemen, you know, Ansar Allah al-Houthi, I'm with them, and, you know, that's where my focus. If anybody's going to defeat Israel and the United States of America, they should get all the weapons. And I hope they get nukes. Yes, that's right. Because every country with nukes, no one of them has been invaded. And as we saw with Gaddafi, as soon as he gave up his nukes, what happened to him? He was murdered in a humiliating, savage way in his own streets. And that's what I'd like to share, and thank you very much.
Well, a powerful set of points, contentions, and some very useful educative material about the Gelman theory. I'll be reading more about that and about our dear and departed friend Gonzalo Lira, an American citizen journalist, murdered by Zelensky in the dungeons of the Ukrainian regime under the watchful and shameful eye of the United States government. No one is in second place. Sorry, I'm not in second place to anyone in my admiration for the people of Yemen. They are not the only honorable Arabs, but they are the largest concentration of honorable Arabs led by an honorable leadership. And I don't myself believe the Syrian story is over yet. I don't believe that we will see ISIS and Al-Qaeda remain in power in Damascus for any great length of time. I was about to put a guess of a timescale. I think perhaps I better not, but it can only be a matter of time. For example, before the army of Iraq and its volunteers crossed the border. After all, the gallant army of Vietnam crossed the border of Cambodia to crush the maniacal, the equivalent of ISIS in communist form in Cambodia, led by Pol Pot and his insane Year Zero project, which led to the massacre of hundreds of thousands of Cambodians if they spoke foreign languages, if they read books, even if they wore eyeglasses. And the Army of Vietnam realized that having such insanity next door was a threat to their own national interest and sovereignty. And so the Army of Vietnam crossed the border and defeated Pol Pot and crushed him. En passant, both Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher continued to recognize Pol Pot as the true president of Cambodia and allowed him to remain in his seat in the United Nations, and sanctioned Vietnam and calumniated it for having the temerity to bring about an end to madness on their doorstep. And there have been others. Nyerere in Tanzania sent the Tanzanian army across the border into Uganda when the Idi Amin, the granduncle of David Lammy, had brought Uganda to such a stage that the carnage and disaster in their territory was a danger to the independence and the national interests of Tanzania. So there have been, if you like, precedents. Russia is already there. Its forces are in passive resistance to ISIS and Al-Qaeda now, but they were not always, and they may not always be again. The Lebanese resistance is not present on the battlefields in Syria, but if the slaughter of minorities were to continue, it may very well be that they become engaged in conflict there again. And of course, Iran was once heavily present in Syria and now is not. But I dare say they've left a few behind. Well, it's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. The show was attended by an exceedingly large audience to whom I'm grateful. And the switchboard basically rang off the hook. So thanks if you tried to get on the show. Try again and we'll bump you up the list of those called. And God willing, I'll see you on Tuesday night at 7 for Have It Out with Galloway, and on Wednesday at 7 for the mother of all talk shows. Good night.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.